Hey, what's up? It's Dan Riccio and Randip Janda, Team Spro versus Team Dod Soda, as you know. And last week, Randip, we debated which of Calgary or Edmonton is in a better spot. Well, both have yet to clinch, but certainly Oilers fans were coming at you over the week.
Oh yeah, I said Calgary was in a better position, and you should have seen my mentions after Calgary dropped the game to Dallas. People were saying, "Oh yeah, Edmonton is so much better off." Who is the schmuck? One team could clinch, the other one is fighting for their lives in Game 7. But hey, what can I say? Sometimes it's not popular to be right, Dan.
Yeah, Game 7 Saturday is going to be insane. Of course, Carolina, Boston, Toronto in that series with Tampa Bay, and the nightcap Edmonton against the LA Kings. And that's what we are here to preview for you. And this series has been wild. I mean, Edmonton hasn't played all that well, but they're led by number 97. Period. End of story. The man has just put this team on his back and led them here to Game 7.
Yeah, put a cape on this guy. He actually is Superman for the Edmonton Oilers. Connor McDavid, when we look at how many points he's been able to score in these 6 games, 12 points, 2 points per game. That's how good he's been. In the first 90 seconds of the game as well, he ends up getting a goal, dragging his team into that game right off the bat, powering them. And even beyond that, 25 of the goals scored in this series, Connor McDavid's had a role essentially in 18 of them. If you look at, his involvement on the play. So to me, that is something that is just superhuman if you think about it. This is a guy that's trying everything he's got, every ounce of energy he has in the series. He's trying to guide his team to the next round, something that's been elusive for this team. And even matched up against Philip Danault with Leon Draisaitl in the last game, the first time we've really seen that consistently. They didn't score 5-on-5 at even strength, but even then they were winning that matchup for the most part, getting more chances. And Danault's doing a great job, but that tells you that Connor McDavid, this is big for him. This is a massive, massive moment in his career, and he's putting everything he has into this series.
Well, I think, there is a little bit of a legacy conversation for Connor McDavid that has to start at some point, right? The Oilers' failures in the playoffs, ultimately, yes, Connor McDavid has done his job in terms of leading this team with his production and putting them on his back, as we talked about. But you get swept by Winnipeg. I mean, that's not a good look for the guy who's considered the most talented and best player on the planet. Generational players win cups. They get past the first round, Randy. Remember the conversations around Alex Ovechkin? He scored a ton of goals in the playoffs, but Washington kept losing. They could never get past the second round. He could never beat Sidney Crosby. And that conversation didn't stop until the Washington Capitals eventually won. It didn't matter how many goals Ovi put up in his playoff career before that, because he was just looked at as a playoff failure. And at some point, that is going to land on Connor McDavid, fair or unfair. Now, I will say the Oilers do need some more out of certain players in this series. And the one player for me is the aforementioned Leon Draisaitl, Randip. Look, they finally put him and McDavid together. Jay Woodcroft needed to do that, because away from Connor McDavid at 5-on-5 in this series, with Leon Draisaitl on the ice, the Oilers have 1 goal for and 6 against. Yes, I know he has 8 points in this series, including 5 goals, but that is a number that the Oilers cannot survive on. Whether they get past LA or not, they need Leon Draisaitl to be better moving forward at 5-on-5.
Well, the reality is that, you've got Leon Draisaitl, and he was matched up with Philippe Danault for a little bit, not in the past game since he was playing with McDavid, but even before that, and it didn't go well. That was a matchup that didn't work for the Edmonton Oilers.
Modern day Guy Carbonneau, man.
No, hey, he's been killing it. Right? There's no other explanation. Philippe Danault is playing elite hockey, and he can do whatever he wants in the regular season. We saw with Montreal, he wasn't a goal scorer. In LA, he put up 27, but he is made for playoff hockey. But Leon Draisaitl, this is a moment where you can put up the numbers like crazy in the regular season. You can be a 100-point player. You can be a 50-goal scorer, but you have to be able to provide on 2 separate lines in the playoffs if you want to be a contending team. And the gap that I see is Connor McDavid, you can put him with pretty much anybody and he'll produce, but can you get that secondary scoring? And listen, for Game 7, the Oilers might stick with the, as I like to call them, the Twin Towers, the Macho Man Randy Savage and the Hulk Hogan combo, where you put them together. It's that awkward handshake. That's something that they can win that game 7 with. But beyond this round, even if they get past LA, which is a huge ask, I do wonder when you talk about teams that really have success. We're talking about, Tampa Bay, who's won the last 2 cups. They got a 1-2 punch down the middle, and both of those centers can win matchups consistently in the playoffs, not regular season. Go back in history. You mentioned Ovechkin. His team had Backstrom and Kuznetsov, who was playing all world that year. Go back even further than that. Crosby, Malkin. Can you trust Leon Draisaitl to win his matchups against other elite centers? And that's something that has not been answered yet.
So the Oilers need more from Leon Draisaitl. Do they need more from somebody on your end?
I think they're going to need a little bit more from, and this guy, I don't blame the series on him because I know there's a lot of rhetoric, but to me, Mike Smith in game 7 is going to have to be that much better. The pressure is on, and this is the moment where one mistake, overthinking a play, potentially trying to do too much can cost you. And that's why I look at the goalie where, we've seen moments where he's made the odd mistake. Sometimes his goaltending has not been great. Sometimes his puck handling 90% of the time is excellent, but that 10% bites them. To me, I'm looking at this player to say, all right, game 7, we know that confidence can be fleeting for this Edmonton Oilers team, or when they're going, they can, they've got all the confidence in the world. Your job as a goaltender is to give your team more confidence, to puff out their chest a little bit. Do not take it away. So I'm looking at Mike Smith to say, play your game, but don't try to overdo it, because that's where the mistakes come. So who do they need more from? They need more consistency from a Mike Smith, and they don't need mistakes from Mike Smith in game 7. That's the guy I'm looking at in game 7.
I got to say, if I'm an Oilers fan, my heart jumps into my throat every time Mike Smith leaves his crease. As producer Drew likes to say, goaltenders need to tend the goal. And hopefully, for the Oilers' sake, Mike Smith does that in game 7.
And
now,
avoid the dang-its. You can't have those dang-its in playoff games.
Can't have dang-its in the playoffs, especially in game 7s. So one final thing on this, we talk about needing those 2 centers to go. I think that's going to be a big storyline, even if the Oilers get past the LA Kings here. And they realistically, Randy, they need to get past the LA Kings here. They come in as huge favorites. All due respect to the Kings, they've been a good story this year, but your boy Drew Doughty isn't even playing in this series. And for Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl to lose to a Drew Doughty-less LA Kings, that is a terrible look. Everybody talks about, well, if the Leafs don't win in the first round this year, there's going to have to be big changes. What about the Edmonton Oilers?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes if they lose game 7 as well. And we talk about styles make fights, and LA style is not an easy one to play against. Well, Edmonton can only play one style, and to me, if you lose this, it's gonna put everything under a microscope. And specifically, there are limitations on what you can do with the roster to a certain extent. You've got committed dollars. We talk about the big 2 players, Draisaitl and McDavid, but even beyond that, Darnell Nurse is tied into a long-term deal. Zach Hyman. There are limitations on what you can do, but the one place I look at to say consistency in the playoffs, if they lose, back up the Brinks truck for Ville Husso. Edmonton, make that move. They're going to have to change something up because Mike Smith's under contract for 1 more year. But can you bring in a goalie, whether that's Ville Husso, a Jack Campbell? They're going to have to make a move in the crease and probably spend some money there. So watch out in free agency if they lose this time around. I still think they got to do that regardless, Dan, if I'm being honest. But I think they're that much more desperate because you can't really make that many moves around the rest of the roster. You've got some really, really long-term dollars committed to some big players.
Jay Woodcroft's done a really good job since taking over for Dave Tippett, of course, but at the same time, he still doesn't have a long-term deal. Is that put into doubt if the Oilers don't get through this first round? Maybe they go with somebody more established, but realistically, it should be above where the questions are. Ken Holland hasn't gotten enough out of this team. He hasn't put the right pieces around Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. He's got Duncan Keith, who's looking like an old man, because he is kind of in NHL terms, when Adrian Kempe's coming at him in overtime. He hasn't been the best fit for the Edmonton Oilers. They have a lot of question marks, and a lot of it surrounds the moves Ken Holland has made. There will be questions about his future if the Oilers, at least they should have questions about his future if they can't get past the Drew Doughty-less LA Kings.
You know what's going to hurt, though? You know what's going to hurt more, though, Dan? Is getting beat by Todd McLellan. That's the one that's going to sting even more. So yeah, hey, listen, Ken Holland, I think that's up for discussion. I wouldn't think that this offseason, but I think there's going to be a lot of Edmonton Oilers fans that think otherwise.
It's a massive one for the Oilers. What do you think will happen in Game 7? Let us know in the comments with your takes. We'll respond to as many as we can. Remember to check out the sprocollection.ca and also dodsoda.ca to join the respective teams. We'll see you in the next video.